Well, they blew up all the chickens in Bonanza last night. Now they burned down the jobs board too. Down at the showdown, they're getting ready for a fight. Gonna see what them merchant boys can do. Now there's trouble busting in from CBS, and Jonathan Cars can't get no relief. Gonna be a rumble by the microwave, and the town council's hanging on by the skin of their teeth. Well, now everyone cries, baby, that's a fact. But everyone that cries chugs their root beer back. Put your gold star on, get your bandana pretty, and meet me at Kid Nation in Bonanza City.
My name is Michelle Konkkasuwan. I am an executive producer in reality TV. Currently been working on a series for TLC called Sweet Home Sextuplets. A show about a lot of kids. And back in the day for Kid Nation, I was a story producer in post-production on the editing side.
Cool. Amazing. And then what episodes of Kid Nation did you work on?
I did 2, which is To Kill or Not to Kill, the famous chicken killing episode that everybody remembers, and episode 5, which is the first election.
Oh yeah,
Viva la Revolution.
Very controversial.
And let's see, 8, which was the talent show. Probably not the most exciting episode, but it was cute. And then 11, which was the second time they killed chickens as well. And what was that one about? Education.
Yeah, 11 was called I Just Like the Recess Part.
Yes, the great Taylor line, yeah.
That one also involved lots of chicken killing. They kind of brought it back.
They did, yeah. Both the chicken killing. I worked on both the chicken killing episodes. So
now that's what I was curious about, because you mentioned when we were starting to get in contact with you that episode 2 was a favorite of yours. Was there any particular reason? It was that one was like the first episode. We really meet the kids, and everyone's getting into town. And the second episode is like when we're like, all right, we're in, we're killing chickens, we're establishing caste systems, and doing all that kind of stuff.
It's crazy because, there's no way we could do a scene like that today. Absolutely. And it was mind-boggling that, we got away with it back in the day. But I don't know. It was just, if you're going to work in reality TV, it's pretty shocking. Kids killing chickens. And, I'm sure it was controversial. A lot of the kids were scared and didn't want to do it. But then you had kids like Greg, who, certain kids were definitely cast on the show because they could work with animals, or they had experience, like he had experience working, for a butcher. So he knew what he was doing. It wasn't like,
he was there to lead the kids for sure. Because Greg, and we talked about this with some of the other kids, like Greg was a butcher and he laid PVC pipe and he's like fixing toilet.
Yeah. He had more jobs than I have right now at 30.
A lot of the kids came from the rodeo circuit. And so, or farms. So they had experience with animals, and then the other flip side were like the genius kids and the super smart, intelligent kids. So they brought in a lot of people who had kids that had abilities and that would work for this. So knowing that, not every kid had to go to the chicken killing if they didn't want to. It was their option, it was their choice. Some of them were really into it, and it was a good learning experience for them. I know that there were people, there were adults there to supervise, to make sure that no kid was going to get hurt, or that they were properly cleaning things and they weren't going to get sick. So it was fairly safe, but still, just killing animals on television, I don't know if you could do that. I mean, I guess there are shows out there about, hunting and stuff in Alaska, but
maybe if you made it like a farm to table angle, then sure. But like, it was very, I guess, the idea of the show is very like primitive. Like, you're going in and just working with what you got. And yeah, I mean, the chickens, classic pioneer abilities.
From the moment you got the job or you accepted the job offer to when you actually got into the edit bay, what were your like preconceptions of what you were getting into? Like, did you know you were going to be dropped right into, editing raw footage of kids killing chickens, or what did you think the show was going to be when you first accepted it?
I mean, the chicken killing part was definitely not, I don't think, in the sort of something that they told us right away. But I think that we knew it was going to be extreme and it was going to be challenging, and I think a lot of people got this idea it was going to be like a Lord of the Flies kind of thing. Are the kids going to just turn on each other and it's going to be chaos? And not knowing sort of like how doc style it would be or how formatted it would be. And it ended up being very formatted, being a big network show. I think a lot of people who worked on it on the editing post side thought there would be more moments of, it would feel more doc style.
Mm-hmm.
You could let the moments play, and but it was cut very fast, so to fit in all the different elements. But that's the bigger difference. Like, there was a lot of footage that what we got to see in post of just sort of who these kids were and how authentic they were. That it was hard to fit in every show.
Was there parts that you wished that we saw more in the show, or that and maybe not for the show itself, but just that you enjoyed watching, even in story producing, and being like, wow, this is actually just fascinating to see these kids do whatever, have their little debates, or figure out their lives.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think you just got little snacks, little tidbits of each of their personalities. And you got to see them, you got to see who everybody, was and what their personalities were. And I think the fans picked up right away on, everybody's different personalities and quirks. And, but like to really live in moments of, how funny and sometimes absurd, and like extreme characters like Jared, who you could just watch for hours. He was always so quirky and funny and himself, and just watching the episodes that I worked on recently, to talk to you guys, I just remember Jared just being so they're so unique and saying anything off the top of his head. And there was, more of that like,
damn,
that people, you just couldn't fit it all into the episode.
Yeah. There are quite a few moments, especially with like Jared or Taylor, where we were like, did a producer feed them that line, or was that just off the top of the dome? And
because they're so smart, they're so quick. Like it is like fast. Even Alex, you're just like, wow, this kid is like.
Alex, I knew he was saying it for real.
Yeah. No, that was really those kids. That was really Taylor. That was really Sophia. That was really Jared, Alex.
So cute.
And, they were just precious, absolutely precious. And, even like what I loved seeing, was not just like Greg being the tough guy, but, he had, moments of vulnerability or softness. And I think that, I think there was always the question that, he was always being nice because of wanting to have a gold star or not.
Yep.
But I mean, he's human, so I think he did have a soft side. I think it's just, it was overshadowed a lot by his bruteness.
Totally. Well, and I feel like it switched from episode to episode. Sometimes Greg was that like big brother carrying the kids to their bunk if they were crying.
He loved carrying kids.
He loved carrying kids to their bunks. He had big brother energy. And then sometimes he was, which is the interesting part watching back, like the villain. And we've talked about this in reviewing the show, like how there are these archetypes of villain and hero and this, but then it's all kids. So that's like the other part that makes you go, you'll start watching this and be like, wow, why are they doing this to them? And then you're like, they are 10. That is why.
Exactly. They're kids and kids are kids and they, they're still developing and, and some of them are hormonal and, it's like, and they're still learning. And they're also not always, confronted with what's inappropriate to say. Poor Taylor said some terrible things.
I mean, who did when you're a 10-year-old? Like, I was a 10-year-old little brat. Like, if you saw me interacting with my mom at the mall, you'd be like, that kid is a nightmare. And you're thrown into a situation where you're not home. It's high stress. You're dirty.
There's blizzards and thunderstorms.
There's blizzards and thunderstorms and chicken slaughtering sessions. Like, it's not normal life by any means. And you have, like, cameras on you.
Exactly. And, we don't, you haven't had a life experience to, like, call you out as much in terms of, like, okay, that was really rude or shallow for you to say. And, so they, but, out of the mouth of kids, that's the charm of the show.
I wanted to ask a question about episode 5, the Viva la Revolucion. So in that showdown, we find out that the kids have not had access to toothbrushes until this time because toothbrushes is one of the prizes. I was just wondering, like, what other disgusting things were you privy to from the raw footage? Like, they didn't have... in terms of, like, basic hygiene things, like toothbrushes or things of that nature.
I'm not really the person to ask about that, to be honest. I really, I'm not sure. I feel like there were things, that they were given so that they weren't completely, like that they wouldn't come out of this with like 5 cavities. I'm sure that maybe that was exaggerated, but I don't, I really not positive that they weren't allowed, a toothbrush until then. I'm not sure, like, to be honest.
Some off-camera toothbrushing.
Well, I forgot who mentioned it, but Laurel and Anjay, because we do see a clip of them doing, like, baking soda
scrubs.
gummers, basically, and they were like, yeah, they just gave us baking soda and told us to go wild with it.
That was just like a prize reveal that I think was really just... What was a prize was always really shocking in the show, because sometimes it would be basic necessity things, and then other times it'd be like ponies and balloons and, these other things that were symbolic of the Pony Express, but it was like ponies or pizza or whatever that is. I guess in terms of saying that it was, rather than letting it play out and it was more formatted, were things like the showdowns or the council meetings, were those pretty straightforward in terms of post, or were these longer, were there more segments that we didn't see that were more narrowed down once it was time to go into edit?
You mean like, well, the showdowns, yeah, definitely are highly edited and they take a lot longer, and you only have so much time in the show. Even like, you can tell that everything is you have to fit it into a certain amount of time. And like, the election speeches and everything was a lot longer than what you see. And even the chicken killing was, when I watched it recently, I was like, whoo, that happened really fast. And I remember that taking a lot longer and watching all that footage. And, that's a scene that took weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to edit.
Wow.
And the showdowns would take, just as long. and you had to go in there and have it make sense. And that was the hardest part of editing that show, is you're following 40 characters at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not even getting everything on camera because you can't cover all 40 kids at one time. And so everything has to kind of make sense. And so, yeah, they're like all the elements were in there, but definitely they were all truncated.
So you mentioned like following 40 kids, and I know on the show we definitely don't meet, like we'll see them, but we don't really meet all 40. It seems like we really focus on maybe half, like 15, 20, and with 10 core kids. Was there lots of footage of these unseen, unheard kids, or was the camera really focusing? Were they like already kind of focusing on what kids we're going to cover, or did you just have everything?
Yeah, we had. I think there was enough footage of all the different kids, but you had to kind of focus on who the story followed for that particular episode.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to tell their story. And, I'm sure there were definitely moments and good one-liners with all the other kids,
mm-hmm.
but you just didn't have time in the show in order to track specific character stories. And you always had to focus on who was the potential Gold Star winner,
mm-hmm.
Who might be relevant to the issues they had with their different classes that they're in. If somebody, had an issue with not cooking or
the dishes, always.
Dishes, that was huge. That was a real issue. And then you always had to focus on what kid could possibly go home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then you were also tracking the different council members,
mm-hmm.
to knowing, if they were going to say, they were going to be questioned, their leadership was going to be questioned at some point. You had to kind of set that up a little bit as well. So, and that's all reality TV is. You're always trying to track specific stories.
Yeah. Well, one thing I found kind of interesting is that in the show, there's only 3 kids who leave Kid Nation. There's Jimmy, who leaves on the first ep. There's a young girl, Randy, who leaves pretty late in the series. And then there's a kid, I forget his name, but he leaves because he's kind of homesick for his girlfriend. I was wondering, were there more instances, at least in the raw footage, of kids being so homesick to the point that they were seriously considering leaving? Because I was surprised that only 3 left.
If there were, it wasn't on camera,
mm-hmm.
as far as I know. Because if there was a kid that was thinking of leaving, we milked it.
Yeah.
We milked it as much as we could. And I think a lot of them, everybody goes to camp, and you have those kids that go to summer camp and they're homesick and they're crying, and that's just part of camp. I never experienced that myself. I was like, yay, I away from home, and I didn't care to go home. But I think that's just normal, but in terms of that being an element of the show, that, every week there was the stakes of making sure people didn't go home. I think they probably, if they thought somebody was going to go home, they were going to follow that.
Totally. It almost felt like more kids did go home, because those scenes where they did go home were I feel like the last whole half of the episode was cutting into that one kid crying, and that will they or won't they, and then the council meeting is that big reveal of yep, Jimmy is 8 years old, so he wants to go home. That makes sense.
I thought they were going to convince Jimmy to stay. I really did. I was like, oh, Jimmy.
Oh, I know. He was
so cute.
He was a precious little Muppet baby, honestly. He was just so cute. But he had this great line. These kids are just so funny. He was like, I'm too young for this. Is a line he says. And I was like, he's very self-aware that he is, in fact, 8's young. 8 is because there's some 8-year-olds who are preteens, and there's some 8-year-olds who you're you are a baby. Pour one out for Jimmy and Randy and Cody. I guess
Cody,
you know.
Yes.
I know. They just wanted beds, I'm sure, also.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like with Jimmy, I was sad to see him go, but at the same time, I was proud of him to be aware of himself, that he was probably it was too much for him.
Did you?
But
Did you grow? I mean, it sounds like you really remember these kids. I mean, I guess you spent a lot of time looking at a lot of hours of footage of them, and you know, you mentioned these cute Jared quotes, and you know, rooting for Jimmy. Did you have? And not that it has to be like favorites, but from watching, like, were there kids that you grew attached to and viewing this footage, and maybe even watching the show after, you know, when it aired?
Well, working on the show, my favorite the whole time, of course, was Sophia.
Great kid, all-star Kid Nation kid, gold star champion, all the way.
She totally deserved it. She was very, you know, what was lovable about her, she was so smart and so insightful, and she spoke up for a lot of people who didn't, you know, were too afraid to say anything. She had her flaws and her vulnerabilities, and she would admit to them. You know, she embraced her nerdness, and you know, it's just something to admire. She just had a great personality, and she was a good person. You know, when I went back and I watched my recent episodes, and he was one of my favorites at the time, but I'll have to say again, Jared is the kid who, and this was, you know, true working on the show as much as watching it, is like I lived for the Jared moments.
Yeah.
I lived for them. Like I just read, like, I'll take it whatever you want to say. His hair, I mean, like his hair was amazing with the bandanas, and and Alex would have gray hair too sometimes.
He had a cowlick that just would not go down.
That tooth.
Oh my god.
The one tooth. Such a strong, noble tooth. So much power in that tooth.
The nerdiness of the kids, like the kids, like the real, you know, the ones talking about quantum mechanics, and like that was for real. They were really that smart.
Wow.
And there was more footage of that than we could put on the show, like how highly intelligent they were.
So you're saying that CBS really messed up not making this 2-hour episodes?
Yeah, that was back in the day, you know, before the 2-hour episode format came out. But yeah, I just think there was definitely more meat to chew on for this show. Like when I watch it now, I see, you know, I'm not a fan of really short sound bites and, you know, interview bites. I have a tendency myself to make them a little bit longer, anyway. And, but even back then it was, you know, part of the style back then to like have them really quick.
Yeah. Maybe that's what made it, you know, when you're watching as a viewer, either then or now, it does almost seem like, are these kids really seeing it? And maybe it's that editing style is because it's so quick. You're like, this must have been fed and just like, here, say it, let's go. You know, like it does have that speed that makes you question the authenticity just in retrospect. But I think that was kind of par for the course with those early aughts, sort of mid-aughts shows.
That's definitely the case. I think it was, you know, everything had to move really quick and very fast. Plus, they were packing so much into each episode, and you were following 40 kids. So, and you were trying to get all these different voices. So you really didn't have the time. Yeah. You know, you could tell that things were edited down in terms of their interview bites or cut off. Like they were about to say something else. Yeah. And you're like, what were they going to say? But that you had to move on. And, yeah, it was just part of this. A, I think the style back then, and B, we just, you know, you had to fit so much in.
Wow, no, this is really giving great context because from the kids too, when we asked them, like, did you really say this? This is so cute. And they're like, yeah, that was just, we weren't being fed. Like, I know it really seems like most, you know, and I know this from casting work in reality, like, you can produce and you can edit, but, you know, they're saying what they're going to say. And yeah, no, hearing about how this had to move quick with so much meat, it's like, how can you even let them just marinate in who they are and have those those quiet, quirky moments. And we did get to, like, those are the best moments, I think, when you really just get to see them. Even, like, Colton or Cody, like, charged a bull, and you're like, I need to follow more of this kid. What is this kid? Emily with her, I break wild Mustangs, and, like...
I mean, Jared and Alex finding the
carcass.
The bones of a cow, and talking about carbon dating, and it's incredible.
It's really... But there's one kid who gets a moment, and it's on an episode that you worked on, that we were just... It's one of our favorite scenes from the talent show. I believe her name is Jasmine.
Yes.
And she sings this song, and forgive me, here I go trying to reinterpret it. She's like, haters don't hate because I keep them in fear. And she sings this, like, I'm guessing an original song, but it's, like, kind of like a cool, almost like Mary J. Blige-esque, like, my haters back up because I'm a haters.
Yeah.
And do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
I know. I don't remember. I mean, all of the things in the talent show definitely could have played a lot longer. It was so quick.
But it was
that would have no context to it whatsoever.
Totally. We've never met this kid, and then she comes out the gate with this insane original song that was like, wait. As soon as she left, we're like, wait. Who was that?
Yeah,
that was
this is one of our biggest Kid Nation mysteries. We're trying to find out more info on the incredibly talented Jasmine, who in her only 10 seconds on 13 episodes of Kid Nation blew us away, and we cannot stop singing the song.
Haters don't hate because I keep them in fear, and it's like I just love this like 10 or 11-year-old just being like a song about her haters. It was just so good.
I know. I wish you could have like included more of the song in the show, and also like had more moments of her in that episode.
Yeah.
So that it didn't come out of nowhere. Like, who is this person?
Who are her haters? Are they on Kid Nation or are they back home?
Where do the haters reign? In the Bonanza City? I mean, I think I'm pretty much rounding home. Do you have anything else? I have one last question, but if you have anything to throw in.
My last question was, of course, about Jasmine, the incredible Mary J. Blige.
Well, once we saw you worked on the episode, we're like, finally! And then it's like, I love that it's like, there's just so many freaking kids. Like, and that's true. I mean, 40 kids is a lot.
I mean, I wish I knew more about Jasmine. She didn't necessarily, she was one of the quieter kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was one of those hidden talents that like came up around talent show time. We're like, what? Who's that? And luckily,
I guess I did have one question since you did work earlier in the show in episode 2. So there are kids that they picked to be town council leaders right from the get-go. The producers did. And these were kids like Mike and Taylor that the producers clearly wanted to push a story arc around, even though about midway through the series, they kind of fell off. I was wondering, did you ever butt heads with any producers in that you were like getting raw footage of kids who you were like, oh, these kids are amazing, we should start to feature them, but they're like, no, we got to really push the Mike and Taylor story, or something like that?
Well, I mean, it was never a question that Taylor wasn't going to be one of the stars of the show. I mean, that was never, she provided great television moments constantly. Mike was somebody who, unfortunately, like he got put in this leadership position, because he was this Boy Scout, and he really tried to live up to that role, and the poor guy, I think, it was overwhelming for him, and he almost put too much pressure on himself to the point where I think the other kids kind of sensed his insecurities, and then all of a sudden some random like Guyland could come along and take his position, and that seemed out of nowhere, but I just think it was because Mike just wasn't as comfortable with himself at that point, to not show his insecurities. And I think we would have wanted to, I think early on, the council, you know, they provided enough good content for us that we didn't feel like, oh, now we have to waste our time with any of the council members.
Yeah.
I
mean, it was a weak political system at the time. Anyone really could have came in from Mike at that point. Like, it seemed like every council member, besides Laurel, pretty much was taken, like, at least, you know, there was some, not aggression per se, but, you know, judgment, like, you're not doing a great job, or this, I could do this better, which I think most kids have that attitude, right? Like, why are you in charge? I could do this thing.
I mean, that was part of the, I feel like sort of one of the Lord of the Flies aspects of the show is that if you had showed any discomfort with who you were, you know, other kids sensed it. And as part of some organized society, they were like, okay, you're out, you know. Laurel was somebody who was just very comfortable with herself.
Yeah.
And it's not like they said different things. It's just that she just put out an energy that she was comfortable with who she was. I feel like she wasn't nervous, and that's how the different kids responded to their leaders. And of course, you know, Taylor was just lazy.
I mean, you could be. I mean, we said it when we were watching the show. Like, you could be doing dishes, or you could just be having a daytime slumber party with your yellow team girlfriends. Like, I would probably do the latter as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she, you know, I think she thought that, like, I think none of them knew that their leadership could be, you know, put at risk. So they felt like, oh, I can do anything.
Right.
And, you know, then, you know, the reality of, you know, possible confrontation comes up in terms of their leadership, and it played itself out. And, you know, Anjay, whew, he was so haunted by Olivia.
Oh, I know.
That was real.
Yeah.
That was ruthless.
We did talk to Anjay for an interview a couple weeks ago, and he did mention that his problems with Olivia were a little bit overblown. He said that on the ground, they got along a little bit better than what was ultimately presented, which was nice to hear.
And that the main problem Olivia had, which I was shocked, was that he swore in front of her tiny sister, Mallory. So there's kids who swore and were more, you know, like rough around the edges, and then there was the very clean-cut, maybe more religious, maybe more, you know, conservative kids. And he said it was just like an ideological disagreement, basically. It wasn't like personal, like I don't like you. It was like, I don't agree with you. But it's interesting, right, seeing that on a kid's scale, because now adults are doing it now more and more in our political system. But we'll save that for another podcast. But like now we're doing that more like, well, I just don't like you because I disagree with you, right? Like that's how kids and adult children also operate a lot of the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You made me sorry, you're making me think of new questions, so I have to get it out. But you mentioned like rodeo children, which, because I've heard that they were looking through, you know, the smart kids circuit, and homeschool kids, I think, is a trend, and rodeos. Because Guylan, and you brought up Guylan, which I'm glad you did, and he mentions living in a zoo often, like in his little interviews. Were there zoo children, or were there other sections? You mentioned rodeo kids. Were there other strange, not strange, but you know, alternative lifestyle children, maybe that we like rodeo kids? I didn't even think of that. That's brilliant, rodeo kids, because they know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Not that I can, remember that it was beyond the zoo growing up. Yeah, now that you reminded me about Guylan growing up in the zoo. No, I can't remember.
He mentions it really randomly twice, and it's always like, what? Tell us.
We should clarify, he didn't grow up in a cage in a zoo. It was a family zoo.
No, he was the
attraction.
The one-eye, the six-eyed, Guylan boy.
I think you're thinking of, like, circus.
Yeah, I'm thinking of circus, not zoo. And then I think, okay, now I'm actually at my last question, because now you're an executive producer. What, at yet again, this is fantasy. How do you think a show like Kid Nation could get made now as an executive producer? Or is that just like impossible? Is there something you could change to the format to make it something that could happen in this new modern decade? You know, in a non-pandemic world, of course.
Well, if you had a lot of money,
okay,
and you know, which things are, you know, a little tighter on the budget these days. And I think the problem is the sort of child labor aspect of it.
right.
And that's what we were called out for. And, you know, because we're in New Mexico, they didn't have the strict child labor laws there. And still, I think there are some states that don't have the strict child labor laws. But, and I think, you know, a lot of shows do get away with shooting with kids, you know, for longer hours than you normally would in other states. But for a show that's so centered on kids, where your whole cast is kids, and it looks like that they're put under those like very challenging circumstances, it's just that red flag is going to go up.
Right.
And I feel like we all felt at the time that the campaign against the show was, you know, it was fed by, you know, rival networks that didn't want the show to succeed. And that, you know, they're like, this is going to be huge. It's going to be a major franchise. How do we kill it?
Whoa. Network wars.
That's crazy.
Oh, for sure. But with that said, do they have a good point? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I feel like reality shows in general, they try to get away with a lot more in terms of working with kids. And, you know, that's a very controversial thing for me to say, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be more, you know, conscious of kids and what they're able to do at their ages. And, you know, I mean, with that said, I feel like most of the kids loved it. I would love to believe that they got a lot out of the experience. They saw it a lot like a really like high level summer camp, you know, like if you were going to space camp or some, you know, advanced sports camp or something like that, that they learned a lot and they developed, you know, they got a lot of life experience out of it, but it's also seen as a job and they're working.
Right.
So
they're talent, you know, like they're no show without them.
Well, isn't that the legal loophole, apparently, that because this was technically a summer camp, that you were able to skirt laws for like filming as far as maximum hours in a day for children? Or
I don't know. I can't really talk to sort of how they were able to, you know, make sure it was all within the legal laws of New Mexico at the time. And those laws actually did change in New Mexico. So they wouldn't have been able to go back to Bonanza City and do it again.
Damn.
Well, at least the plaque is still there, the giant stone monument.
Is it? Yeah, that's what we wrote. Is it? There's rumors it is, but we don't know.
We're gonna make a road trip there eventually. Stevie has family in the American Southwest, so we're gonna hit up Bonanza City on the drive there one of these days.
The crazy thing is, like, so many kids who watched it, my niece included, could not wait for the next season. They all wanted to sign up for it. Everybody volunteered. They wanted to be on the show Kid Nation, and it was something that kids got excited about and responded to and would love to do themselves as an experience. And who knows, like, maybe there would be a way that they really, you know, set it up as a summer camp and that, like, it was doc style.
Ooh, okay.
because I think because of the very formatted elements of it, with the competitions and things like that, that made it. It was just very produced versus doc style.
Right, like the journal and the whole, then the voting, and then there was always something they did, whether it was a talent show or chicken killing.
I guess the show Bug Juice, which was on Disney Channel back in the 90s and then was rebooted about a year or two ago, would be like the closest analogous show to a true doc style Kid Nation.
Yeah.
Okay, this is actually a random question, and we can cut this out if you're like, no, lady. But Anjay just brought it up, and I just thought of our interview with him. He mentioned that there was like a lot of romance and flirting and like kid couples, and I was like, there was? I'm like, we did not see that on, I don't think, any episode. He's
like 13-year-old holding hands. Stuff
right, like
that,
nothing graphic. But I was like,
yeah,
really?
Was there a big decision by CBS to not have any sort of even like very sweet, innocent, romantic content?
Like not Stand By Me, but where it's like now and then we're like, ooh, like I could see that wanting to be something, but also a decision to be like, we shouldn't do that.
I mean, it was something that was really, part of any discussion that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
Once we got the footage and what the format of the show was, and we knew sort of the different stories we had to tell within that format. There wasn't some major romance that were like, oh my goodness, this is great television. Let's focus on this.
Right.
That it just wasn't part of our agenda. At the time, and I don't think the cameras necessarily followed it either heavily. So I shudder to think that in today's world, people like producers would be asked to produce that kind of a thing.
Oh,
yeah. Which kind of grosses me out.
Yeah.
All
that's
of
why
the Alex and Mallory shippers will have to hold on.
Well, that's why when he mentioned it, he was like, "Oh, watch closely." I was like, "We just watched it." I'm like, I don't remember there being any. And I'm like, and maybe it was more off camera and innocent.
It's like Anjay, we've watched it 5 times.
Yeah. And I was like, I would have remembered a weird makeout scene. It would have jumped to the radar. Well, that was all my questions. Sorry to end with a creepy one, but I had to go. I had to ask.
It's not something that on the post side we were aware of. So there probably did exist, with kids.
It was behind closed doors hand holding. It was
wow. Shook and Bonanza. Well, that's pretty much it. I don't know if you want people to shout out any projects you're working on or things for people to watch or follow you places, or you can leave that be if so, but you're like, nah, it's good.
Nah, don't even worry about that.